free for death and free in death, a holy naysayer, where there is no longer time for yea. Thus he understandeth he about life, or death and life. This is a very Greek idea, right? I think it's Parmenides, could be wrong. One of those old guys said something like, to philosophize is to learn how to die, right? In the ancient Greek world, philosophy wasn't something that people did cooped up in an office, right, at a university, right? Philosophers were people. I mean, Seneca was the chief administrator of the Roman Empire. He's a great Stoic philosopher. There was no academy then, right? Like, philosophers were people who would think, but they're very practical people in a certain way. We tend to think of philosophy in this day and age as being something that's done by people with beards in some office, right? The Greek philosopher was a person who was learning how to die, right? To be able to face death fearlessly. The man who has learned, it's line from somewhere, the man who has learned how to die has unlearned how to be a slave, right? Point being, how do you live the good life? That's the question for at least much of Greek philosophy. So the activity of philosophy is about constituting a way of life rather than, speculating on some out there, premise one. You think of someone like William Lane Craig, it just makes your skin crawl. Premise one, blah, 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 blah. Premise two, blah, blah, blah. And I feel this way about a lot of analytic philosophy. I'm more of a Continental Philosophy guy, because I think there's much more of that spirit of I'm trying to constitute a life through my philosophy. I think more of that survives in the Continental tradition. The more abstract philosophy is, the worse it is. The more concrete and in touch. This is what I find so appealing about existentialism. The more concrete and in touch with what it is to be a subject and to struggle with one's subjectivity. The closer to that, the more, I think, the more valuable philosophy is. That's a value judgment, right? It's not I don't mean to state that as some overarching truth, right? But this idea of to philosophize is to learn how to die, this is what I think Nietzsche is invoking. And in Nietzsche, there's always this kind of nostalgia for the Greeks, right? And I think there's a nostalgia for the Greek attitude to philosophy as well in Nietzsche. So when he says something like, free for death and free in death, a holy naysayer, when there is no longer time for yea, thus understandeth he about life and death, right? Free for death and free in death. It's a good line, but I think it's very much tied to a longing for Greek, for the ancient world, right? And this is something very characteristic of Nietzsche's philosophy, particularly his early philosophy. If you read The Birth of Tragedy, for instance, you find it very much there. And people don't realize that Nietzsche was a great scholar. Like, Nietzsche knew more about the ancient world than most. Nietzsche was also a great philologist and all of this. So there's always this longing for pre-Christian times, right? So I don't know, maybe you can extrapolate out from there. This might be reading much too into it, but maybe you can extrapolate out from there and say something like, for Nietzsche, Christianity killed the philosopher, right? Christianity has made the philosopher into something like a hollow shell of its former self. Maybe you can say that. I'm not sure. That your dying may not be approached to man and the earth, my friends. That do I solicit from the honey of your soul. In your dying shall your spirit and your virtue still shine like an evening afterglow around the earth. Otherwise your dying hath been unsatisfactory. Again, you think of something like Gran Torino or The Wrestler, like, get that feeling, right? People watching this can get something out of the death of these people. And if your dying is not, like, I almost want to say that for Nietzsche here, the best way to die, what he's saying is that the best way to die is for your death to be the fulfillment of your life, right? Your projects, your virtue, who you are, the story of your life should culminate in your death, and gloriously so, right? Again, very Viking. Thus will I die myself, that ye friends may love the earth more for my sake. And earth will I again become, to have rest in her that bore me. Verily, a goal had Zarathustra. He threw his ball. Now be ye friends, the heirs of my goal. To you I throw the golden ball. Best of all do I see you, my friends, throw the golden ball. And so tarry I still a little while on the earth. Pardon me for it. Thus spake Zarathustra. Now, what's the thing that I want to get at, or the thing that's interesting here, is that it seems to me like a dream, right? I don't think he's trying to prescribe any course of action to people, right? And so, Jcrebel, you read this passage as having to do with suicide, right? Not, I mean, I can see where you can get that, right? The voluntary death. It sounds like suicide in a certain way. But I don't think he's trying to prescribe anything, right? I think he's trying to get us to think about death. Particularly insofar as Nietzsche's enemy is Christianity. Then for Nietzsche, one of the big problems with the world after Christianity is that we don't have a vocabulary to talk about death and mourning in the same way. And I think there's something true about this, right? Plenty of people would contest me about this, but I think that a lot of our language and a lot of the way we symbolize death, that we ritualize death, a lot of that is very Christian, and in a sense, the way, insofar as we come to terms with death through those symbols and such, then Christianity will always have a hold on us, kind of. So I think what Nietzsche's trying to do here is to talk about death in a post-Christian way that isn't reliant on Christianity. I tried to point out places where it was much more reliant on the Greeks, much more reliant on even the Vikings. I think, the Northern Europeans, as Nietzsche would have said, the people who are bad at religion. There's something about, he's trying to think death in a non-Christian way, right? Without positing an afterlife, how can we think death as a positive thing that we can come to grips with, right? I think that that's the question for Nietzsche. And I think that's an extremely difficult question because, again, once Christianity collapses, you can no longer, for Nietzsche, you can no longer sustain Christian morality. You can no longer sustain Christian iconography. You can no longer sustain any of this. So there's this great existential hole in our world. This is the death of God problem. It leads to nihilism, potentially. Nihilism is Nietzsche's greatest enemy. So I think he's trying to fill in some of those spaces, right? I think he's trying to and I don't think in any totalizing way, but I think the passage is an attempt to begin to recast the question of death in a post-Christian light, or in a non-Christian light, maybe even a pre-Christian light. Yeah, I think that's my feeling. I think that's my reading on the subject. Tell me what you think. Comment, subscribe. Have a good day.